Stave 4 is a much shorter stave. It's the last of the ghosts that we have. This one famously, of course, doesn't speak. What we do have, though, is we have a very early association of death with it. We have the fact it's described as moving gravely, that it is shrouded, like a death shroud, in a deep black garment, and with lots of mention of darkness, the idea that basically it's surrounded by darkness at all the time, so you can barely see it effectively. So what we have straight away is this association with death, in the same way that we might well have seen the Ghost of Christmas Present as the embodiment of Christmas itself, and the Ghost of Christmas Past as an embodiment of our pasts and how they affect us. This is definitely like the Grim Reaper that we're used to. Scrooge's reaction to it is quite different as well. He makes quite clear here that he fears the silent shape so much that his legs tremble beneath him. So it's very important to see that the emotion of fear is present here. We haven't really seen a lot of fear. We've seen a lot of regret, sadness, some joy in the last one, but we actually see fear here, and that's just literally from the effect of seeing it here, seeing what is described down here as one great heap of black. Okay, again, that sense of repetition, blackness, blackness, blackness. He addresses the ghost, of course the ghost won't speak back to him. With this important bit here, he admits the fear, but he says because of this, he's prepared to follow him and go where he wants and bear his company, because he hopes to live to be another man from what I was. This, again, is further example of his progress. At the beginning of the previous section, previous stave, he said that he wanted to find out the lessons. He was ready to take on the lessons he was given. Now he's talking about being ready to change. So it's progress each time. The first place they're taken is to the city. This is the city of London, where what we see is a sense of the centre of money, really, and everything that Scrooge stands for. It's interesting that it's described as a city seems to spring up about them, as though it's not something they enter, it's something that kind of engulfs you and encloses you in the same way that he has been by his love of money. And he's doing it as of its own act as we're going. So it's almost like some kind of disease or something that clings around to you and goes in there. And what we're introduced to, first of all, is a connection here. A load of merchants who chink money that's in their pockets. They look at their watches and they mess around with great gold seals at the same time. So what we're seeing here is images of finance and a sense also of time. It's interesting how no one else seems to be rushed except for these people. Their focus is entirely on money as they move. We're introduced to a bunch of people who are having a conversation. The conversation is about the funeral of what is obvious to us as Scrooge, and we definitely find out later is. But what you want to notice, I think, more than anything else here, is how these people are described horrifically. Physically horrible. A great fat man with a monstrous chin. One who takes a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. Snuff being like sniffing tobacco. Imagine what that looks like. And especially as it's a huge amount. Them just yawning as they're speaking. And then, possibly the worst of the lot, the red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excretion on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey cock. In other words, a man who has a strange lump hanging off the end of his nose, swinging about, looking a bit like a turkey. Interesting, the idea of him being like a turkey at Christmas. You can make of that what you will. But really what we're seeing here is that they are physically repulsive, as though the money has corrupted them physically. That's what we seem to see here. And when there's been so many descriptions of people as quite attractive and pleasant in the rest of the book, we see what's important. The discussion here is very much about the funeral in a very light-hearted way, showing they don't really care. But what I would note here is they're talking about lunch at this point. I'll only go if there's lunch included. So we see the idea of food in a very, very different way. We've seen food as associated with Christmas, but here it's just as associated with greed. This is clearly at Christmas because everything that Scrooge sees is at Christmas, but there is absolutely no mention of anything to do with Christmas at all. In fact, he meets a second pair of them, people who it's described as down the bottom here of page 96, are very wealthy and of great importance. It mentions that Scrooge had always made sure that he stood well in their esteem from a business point of view. And in discussing his death, they are basically showing a complete lack of concern. One mentions, I see old Scratch got his own at last. The other says, so I'm told, and then changes it to talk about, changes the direction of the conversation to talk about the weather. And that's pretty much that opening scene there. There's a few bits where he looks around and tries to find himself there, showing he doesn't understand, but that's really what we're introduced to.